HR recruiters of Reddit, which is the worst job interview you have ever had? I've had people bring their dogs with them to the interview, people faint, and someone leave a chair soaked with red liquid after their interview. But my worst was last week. A woman brought her attic boyfriend who made her leave early and proceeded to beat her outside our windows. We had to call the police, some fun ones. I had a guy come in to apply for a teaching position. We ran a background check. Offender. He did not get the job. I had a guy have a baggie of substances drop out of his pocket. He just left it behind and walked out. I had someone apply for a CFO position discuss his theory about how only strong men could handle accounting and finance positions since women wouldn't be able to have children if they thought about numbers too much. I had someone who applied for a truck driving job, but he wanted to only work 3 hours a day. Story 2. I once sat in on an interviewer's debrief for a large organization where you need professional skills. They were open to recruiting internally for a new position at a higher level, so a few people already in the organization at a slightly lower level applied and were interviewed that day. One candidate performed so poorly in the interview and demonstrated such a severe lack of skill. Not only did she not get the new position, they decided to have a private meeting about whether or not to fire her from the job she already had. That was, in my view, a really terrible interview. Story 3. HR director here. Here's a few over the years. Was told to give an interview for a manager position for some girl right out of college. Could tell it was someone pulling strings because she had no experience in the field, and her degree was in criminal justice. This was an IT position. Had a guy with a killer resume, all the credentials, come in for an interview. Though it was going to go well, he instead was drunk and high. He couldn't even string a full sentence together. Had a woman go ballistic on me when I asked her about her career goals. I thought I was on an episode of Punk'd. Best one was calling a reference a guy had left for me. Yeah, Stan's a nice guy, shows up on time, keeps to himself. If you need someone to warm a chair for 8 hours a day, he is your guy. If you want someone to do a little more work, I got a cinder block here that's a little more motivated. Story 4. I was a director at a company and was asked to interview an applicant who I had worked with at a previous company. The last time I saw him, security was escorting him from the building because he had listed one of the co-founders as a reference on an application to moonlight for our direct competition. Co-founder got a call asking, "Does this guy work for you?" To which the answer, naturally, was not anymore. We found out he had been freelancing as a consultant for quite some time around our industry, which is just leaps and bounds outside the terms of his employee agreement. All his access was immediately revoked. His phone and laptop were confiscated, and his personal belongings from his desk were mailed to him after we finished the security review. Not sure if the company pursued litigation, but they would have had a case. So naturally, I tell my boss at the new company that he's untrustworthy and point out that he lists the consulting on his resume as a current position along with another full-time gig that he's leaving, so he's not even being discreet about it. Boss asks me to interview him anyway because his skill set looks good. In the interview, I brought up that had 2 current jobs and asked him how much time he was spending on the consulting and whether that would impact his full-time work. He dodged by saying to me, "It hasn't ever been a problem in the past." I was just blown away, like, I was there, dude. I was the one who revoked your access. He didn't get the job. The problem was that he was sharing the company's trade secret. I worked with him at an industry leader. He took the training he got there and brought it to our competition. Not only was this in violation of his non-compete and non-disclosure agreements, it was very against the ethos of the company. Everyone else who worked there focused on getting an edge, being better in a competitive industry, while this dude actively worked against that. It's one thing to work for a year and then go freelance if you want to hustle that way. And I respect that. But to lie to your employer in order to sell their secret sauce across the street after hours is deeply uncool. It's probably important to note that this was a technology company in a competitive landscape. Both old co and new co were highly dependent on proprietary tech, methods, and processes. All this was made really, really explicit, and the penalties for violating it were also laid out clearly. Not a recruiter, but I am a restaurant manager. We were opening a new location and doing interviews. Woman comes in for a management position. During the interview, she reaches into her purse and pulls out a bag from Wendy's and starts eating. The other manager tells her to put it away, and she tells him it is okay. She can multitask. Story 6. Not an HR guy, but was in management. Our HR manager told me about a prospect he was interviewing for my location, and how everything was great until the end, where they were just chatting and asking general get-to-know-you questions. The guy started going in on his casual substances use and how we shouldn't worry because it's just on weekends with his mates out on the lake and that we were invited. Another tried to parlay his years of running substances up from Mexico and distributing them as management experience. Story 7. Was interviewing an internal candidate for a position in a parallel department. I was embarrassed for him. He seemed to think he had the job in the bag, and so came totally unprepared and behaved so arrogantly that it was frankly shocking. He failed to silence his phone. It rang 4 times before he excused himself to silence it, and proceeded to grill us on other candidates during his Do you have any questions for us? Portion. He had dropped by the desk of a coworker the day before the interview and threatened her. I hope this interview goes well. I've got dirt on you all. He played it off as a joke, but his wife was our boss. He'd been hired as a favor to her for a job he wasn't suited for, was trying to parlay the limited experience he'd gotten into this higher-level position, and was so confident in her ability to push this for him that I took particular relish when alternate hiring decisions were made. She'd also clearly fed him info about the role and written his resume, cover letter for him, and was in a snit herself with the hiring manager for passing him over. Story 8. Guy tried to hit me in the eye during his interview after a few insults towards me and refusing to provide his basic certifications. I used to do hiring for a healthcare staffing company. Think of it as a place that sends out substitute teachers to hospitals, but instead of teachers, we send nurses, physical therapists, behavioral health techs, psych techs, and other medical positions. Some of these people just liked being able to try different facilities or have a flexible job that was just a few days a week. Others were basically people, SCD, from the bottom of the barrel, who couldn't keep a stable job because they suck at life. So we sent them somewhere on a contract or for a day or two to do basic stuff. And before the facility, hospital knew how crafty they actually were. They were gone, and we took our cut of the money. I was 24 during the time I worked there and regularly interviewed people 3 times my age. If hired, I was their immediate supervisor as well, so some people took it poorly when someone their kid or grandkid's age was their boss. The interviews were constant. I maybe averaged a dozen a day. Half I might actually have hired. The other half I would have laughed away, but since I had to provide as many as possible, basically anyone got hired if they weren't a clear immediate issue. You only didn't get hired if you showed up drunk, high, had terrible hygiene, or had a really crafty attitude. I had people break down crying and begging me for a job, rehab therapists showing up drunk, people showing up hours late, and several older women and a few men. I had one man who really stood out in my experiences. I interviewed him over the phone beforehand. We had his resume, and his work history looked solid. He had worked in the behavioral health field for about 25 years on and off, so it sounded like he knew what he was doing. And he was very friendly and nice over the phone. In the phone interview, I gave him all the details about how the job works, how they are basically on call certain days to sub in at behavioral health facilities as behavioral health techs, usually in group homes or psych facilities. I sent a follow-up email confirming the date and time for the in-person interview, that there would be paperwork afterwards so we can get him on our roster, and that I would need all his certifications in order to hire him and get him ready to go. This includes first aid, CPR certifications, proof of bachelor's degree or higher, and some other records. He shows up to the interview, late, and according to our secretary, he walked in, looked around the lobby, then asked where the bags of money was because he wanted to get paid. She sat him down in one of the interview rooms, came and got me, and said the guy seemed a little off. I sat down with him and started asking the usual questions to try to get to know an interviewee, and got some surprising answers. How long have you been working in this field? Why do you care? I've probably been doing this longer than you've been alive, which is about how long I've been doing this for 25 years. What about this line of work are you passionate about? What the heck does that matter? Well, if I decide to hire you on, I would be your boss, so I'd like to know why you might enjoy this job, because it gets me paid. Did you bring any of the certifications I asked for in the email? You never asked for anything. Why would I bring it? I read that email, and you didn't tell me to bring anything. It was already obvious that I would never hire this piece of crap. And after the few insults, I decided to put him in his place for wasting my time. I has the secretary give him the first few hiring papers, just to keep him busy while I printed out the email I had sent him that specifically listed the first aid and CPR certifications, his degree, and other certifications that were necessary. After highlighting the exact lines he claimed was never in the email, I walked back into the room, placed it down on top of his hiring paperwork, and walked out for a few minutes so he could have plenty of time to read them. I came back in, sat down, and told him that since he insulted me, refused to provide even the most basic certifications, and was just rude in general, there was no way he could represent our company. His response was something along the line of, "Oh, that's fine, that's just fine," followed with him standing up, tearing all the papers in half, then trying to hit me in the eye. Luckily, there was a table between us, so his reach sucked, so I was able to knock his arm out of the way. He hit my forehead with the pencil. Then I slammed his ass against the wall and told him to leave before we called the cops. He started screaming, then stormed off after knocking some stuff around in our lobby. No serious injury or anything to worry about for me, but that was one hostile interview that I'll never forget. Story 9. Not pro-HR recruiter, but I was doing numerous help in interviews for my previous company as a tech specialist to evaluate technical knowledge of candidate. And now, I am hiring manager. 3 interviews this week, so wish me luck, as it will be the first time I'm going to do it alone. From top of my head, the worst was one guy. around 36 years old, who was school teacher and applied to work for its service desk. Guy had no idea about it. All the questions like, can you tell me what his IP address and how you can find it? Responses were no idea and sad face. Also, the target for our company was students and graduates, so the overall interview was going really bad. That guy was afraid of responsibilities, failures, he was stressed out, and when we finally asked, why did you apply for that position? He said that he's receiving around less than $300 per month and he's struggling to survive. We asked him how much he would like to earn. He said $600, and that would be amazing with almost tears in his eyes, because he had a hunch that we will not hire him. I gave him a test. Not usual procedure, only used to have a quick chat with hiring manager for 10 minutes. And we went out with HM to discuss him. We were so sad and sorry for him that I said we should hire him on the spot. And I can teach him a thing or two. As long as he can absorb new knowledge, he will be fine. Guy almost break in tears when we said to him that he's hired, and base salary is $800. Worst job interview ever. Another one was with the young, 20-something student who would like to be a filmmaker. No knowledge whatsoever. He lied in CV typing stuff like Ms. Access, but he had no idea what is a database, etc. And he was not even trying to get the job. He had attitude like, yes, you can hire me, but I want to make films. My short movies were recognized on some independent local screenings or whatever, but I will accept this offer only if I can choose on what days I will work and when, because I am doing important university stuff, etc. We were working 24 hours a day, so it was a very flexible thing for all the people, but are you serious? He even came dressed like he didn't care. I know that this is stupid that you should wear suit, and yes, it is acceptable to come in with iron shirt and even black jeans pants, throw in a jacket, and it is perfect. But if you are coming with yellow t-shirt and sandals, surely he didn't get a job. Good news about our ex-teacher. He is moving to other company for higher tech position plus better salary. So everything is fine. Good for him. They are saying that he will be missed because he was doing outstanding job for all that time, and he was eager to learn. Story 10, not an HR recruiter, but done some interviewing. Best one was when we got to the have you got any questions for us portion, candidate said, oh yeah, then pulled out a book called Answering Interview Questions for Dummies. It leafed through and went, oh, here's a good one, and asked that. Can't even remember what question candidate asked. Edit. This person was clearly unprepared. They had a notepad that they had brought, where they could very easily have noted down questions they thought would be prudent to ask, rather than pulling out a book that says for dummies on it. This strangely wasn't the reason this person wasn't offered the job. They failed other parts of the interview. This was just a bit of an interesting cherry on the cake. Story 11. A long time ago, I was a manager for GameStop. GameStop was very particular about the interview process. Here's a sheet. Ask these questions. I don't work that way. I'll get to this later though, so I have a whole line of seasonal hires lined up, and I have one guy call me and say he's going to be a little late. That's fine, crap happens. Minnesota's weather sucks. I get it. An hour passes, I have another potential hire come in for their scheduled interview. I take them in the back and the interview goes great. I walk out and there he is. The only way I can describe this guy is hungover without taking a shower. I could smell the bar on from across the store. I ask him, can I help you? Yeah, I had an interview today. I've been waiting for 10 minutes. You had an interview at noon. I've been waiting for 60 minutes. I can already tell this is going to be a good time. We head to the back, and I sit down with him, getting slightly intoxicated on the smell of what I suspect is well tequila. Me. So why GameStop? Him. I don't know, I like video games and stuff. Me. Well, not a requirement, but it definitely helps. I'm still trying to keep a sunny attitude because you never know. Maybe this guy is a hidden gem of a person, just had a rough night. I never try to pretend I know what's going on with, but I've already got quite a few red flags. Him, yeah, I guess. When are you going to ask the questions on the sheet? Me, I'm sorry. Him, the questions you're supposed to ask me. Mate, I don't interview that way. I want to get a feel for the type of person you are, and questions like, tell me about a time you worked as part of a team. Don't really get me the information I need to know about you. Him, well, that's stupid. That's not how you should interview people. So now I'm over the guy, but hell, I deserve some fun. Me, how should I interview people then? The way GameStop says to do it. Me, well, GameStop as a corporate entity doesn't have to work with the people I hire on a daily basis. I like to have people that fit with my team. People who don't call in, that they'll be a little late, and then show up an hour later. People who don't show up to a business where they work or intend to work smelling like the inside of some cheap tequila bottle. Him, it wasn't cheap tequila. Well, I've heard all I need to hear. I'll call if we make the decision to hire you. He then proceeded to mumble some stuff under his breath before leaving the office. I've never had my employees run in to make sure I wasn't passed so fast. This was 6 or so years ago. I'm now a network engineer and don't worry about that crap. Story 12. Not HR, but interviewed a girl for a graduate starter job. She thought it was a temp job from the agency. Asked why she left her last job. I was sacked. Why do you want this job? Agency sent me. Are you interested? No. Story 13. On mobile SOSA is about lack of formatting. I've interviewed some pretty terrible people in my... I used to recruit healthcare staff to work with people with mental health problems, learning disabilities. It's a really tough job, but it's entry level, so you either get people who love the job itself and don't do it for the money, or total crackpots. I've had someone use the expression retarded when referring to the patients in our care. Someone asked if the patients were allowed to have sex with each other. We do explain this very clearly when we interview people. Someone who I suspect to have a mild learning disability themselves hugged me after an interview. I'm a young female, and he had been fairly inappropriate during the interview. I made the mistake of walking him out of the interview room into a very deserted corridor. I think he had good intentions, but it was closer than I wanted to get to him. Somebody who, as the interview progressed, started bowing their head lower and lower into their hands, to the point that we could no longer see their face and thought they had fallen asleep. We also have to perform enhanced police checks and ensure that applicants are not barred from working with vulnerable adults or children. At interview, we ask candidates to disclose any cautions or convictions, or pending convictions. Having a criminal record does not exclude you from working in healthcare. It is very much circumstantial, and obviously the nature of the offense will influence whether or not a candidate is allowed to work for us. However, lying or failing to disclose any convictions will result in an automatic exclusion. But people still tend to either flat out deny having a criminal record or bend the truth. Some of the memorable ones: a woman with a drink driving offense claimed that somebody had spiked her drink with alcohol. A man who declared at interview that he did not have a criminal record, however, would probably end up appearing in court in the near future. Care to explain? He got in a drunken fight with his SO and was arrested last night. A single mother who was working as a daycare assistant at a nursery. Her own childcare arrangements for her 2 young children fell through at short notice, so she did the seemingly logical thing and left them at home for 8 hours, charged with child neglect. A very young girl who, when asked if she had ever been convicted of caution, informed us, anxiously, that she had once been ejected from a bus by a ticket inspector for having an invalid ticket. And to end on a positive note, a guy in his early 50s who had a string of offenses for theft, burglary, and some assault charges that occurred when he was around 25 years old. He also had a folder full of training courses and volunteering that he had been doing for the 25 years after to try and turn his life around. He was possibly the most genuine person I've ever interviewed. When a candidate declares convictions, they are passed to a panel of HR advisors and senior managers who make a decision on whether they can appoint the candidate. I desperately hoped that they would see past his mistakes and look at the person he was trying to become. He thanked me on his first day for the opportunity. To my knowledge, he is still there, working with young male offenders. Story 14. When asked about his work ethic, he scoffed and said, "I work like a Finn beaver." F-bomb drop in an interview not recommended. One guy asked, "Are you guys all uptight with policies like if I look at a girl's ass, am I going to get fired?" Resumes and interviews are comedy gold. Remembered one more classic. I flew to Seattle to be on an interview panel. While grabbing a cup of coffee for the road, I heard a guy making noises in the breakfast area. I turned around with the rest of the folks in the lobby and proceeding to watch this guy in a suit puke all over his breakfast plate, like it literally refilled his plate. I scooted out of there to avoid any mercy puke on my part. Guess who rolls in as the first interview of the day? Could not get that image out of my head. Story 15. I work in a financial institution. I had a person say that they cannot work more than 4 hours a day and only Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She did not want to interfere with her welfare benefits. She also asked what we do if there is cash missing at the end of a shift. Story 16. I'm not an HR recruiter, but I can tell you one of the worst interviews one probably had. My buddy worked at a good-paying job, but it was very dangerous. He managed to get me a job interview with the advice to stress how safety conscious I am. Fair enough. So I'm sitting in the waiting room and I see a very tiny bump on my finger, like a very small wart or a larger pimple. Anyway, my idea is I need to get this off my hand because duck weird growths. Anyway, I use my teeth to pull it off from a wound that's barely the size of a pen point. I ask the girl at the front desk for some tissues, but I pour through those in seconds. Then, the person for my interview enters the waiting room ready to shake my hand, and he looks at my hand with tissues stuck to it. I already see it in his eyes. He's like, "Are you ducking kidding me? This guy manages to butcher himself in a matter of 3 minutes?" The interview was very rushed. Very obvious he had no interest in talking to me, but he had the obligation to. So he gets to the end of the interview, and I could tell he didn't listen to anything I said. He's like, "I have 8 other people applying for this job. Why should I hire you?" Yeah, that safety speech I was all about, not going to happen. So I open my wallet, pull out everything I have, $6, and say as seriously as possible, "This could be yours." Story 17. The worst candidates, I had never made it to the interview stage. I had numerous persons sending me cover letters of 3 sentences. I apply to this in this position. I'm available for interview. Call me for more info. on notepaper, written with pencil with just their phone number on the bottom, no resume. They clearly just applied because they had to for benefits. The worst interview must have been the guy, who was so extremely nervous he was sweating like a pig, threw coffee over his own shirt, forgot most of his English, and completely blanked out with every question. I felt bad for the guy, but this was for a lead engineer position, where he would have to have lots of customer meetings, so we really couldn't hire him. Story 18. I used to be a grooming salon manager for PetSmart. We needed a bather, so I was calling applicants. There was one that had just graduated high school and had no work experience, which can be a crapshoot. But I was willing to give pretty much anyone a shot if they seemed like a good fit, so I call this applicant. We'll call her Jane. A woman picks up, and I ask for Jane. This woman straight up yells across her house, "Jane, phone's for you," and asks me if I'm Jane's mom. No, this is Nunca from PetSmart, and I was just following up on Jane's application. The woman then explains she's Jane's aunt and that Jane's mom is in Europe, and oh, wouldn't it be great if Jane got this job? Also, they're decorating the Christmas tree right now, and isn't that great? Eventually, Jane gets to the phone, and we set up an interview time. I didn't let Jane's aunt's behavior affect her chances of getting the job. Not to mention it was just a PetSmart bather position, not Super SR's. So Jane comes in for her interview. She shows up in an oversized plaid flannel shirt, huge basketball shoes with no laces, a baseball cap, and some big blingy necklace. We're waiting for the ops manager to come to the manager's office so we can interview her together, when Jane tells me that she really hopes she gets the job because she lost her wallet last. So we sit down and ask her to tell us about herself. Jane loves cats. She tells us about her cat, Taco. This is great. We love people who love animals. Since we run a dog grooming salon, I ask her about her experiences with dogs. Has she ever had a dog? Does she have one now? Is she afraid of any breed of dog? Has she ever been bitten, scratched, or threatened by a dog? And so on. No matter how many times I ask her about dogs, she keeps steering the conversation back to cats. I never found out her opinion on dogs, but man does Jane really love cats. Somehow Jane completely took over the interview and told us this really sad story about how she saw a cat get hit by a car. She and a friend took the cat to the vet, but the cat didn't make it, so they took the cat home and buried it in her friend's backyard. Jane had some butterscotch candy in her pocket, so she threw the candy in the grave and named the cat Butterscotch. While telling the story, Jane had an appropriately sad expression on her face, but then she got to the end and said that they went out for ice cream afterwards, and ice cream makes everything better. And she was weirdly bubbly about that. My ops manager and I could only stare, mouths agape. We ended the interview very shortly after her story. Jane did not get the job. Story 19. I'm not HR, but arranged to meet for a group interview for a low-level position. Attire was smart casual, pretty standard affair. 2 other people were going to be interviewing as well, and I was initially nervous, as any 21-year-old would be. I show up a few minutes early. There's one guy there, no sign of the other, and the one who is there is dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie. About 20 minutes into the briefing of the roles and responsibilities of the job, guy 2 shows up, dressed in full pinstripe business suit plus tie, and it was obvious it didn't fit. He then proceeds to loudly verbally comment on literally everything the interviewer was saying. Nothing bad under any other circumstances, but for an interview. If I could summarize the way this guy handled things in 2 words, it would be wildly inappropriate. Individual interviews come up, and the one guy that was there before me goes first, and after 10 minutes leaves pretty nonchalantly. Next is me, standard affair. I give him an overview of my technical background and work history, and he just sort of sits there quietly for a bit after I finish, leaving a bit of an awkward silence. Then chimes in, "I think we'll just go ahead and give you the offer." Sweet. We leave the office, and as I beeline for the door, I hear guy 3 get told to just leave. That people can screw up an interview so bad is baffling. Properly dressing, showing up on time, and basic politeness should not even be a limiting factor in an interview about your skills. Story 20, but had to interview a bunch of people for several roles. I have so many stories, but I think I'll go with the most idiotic. Unprompted, the guy talked about how he went to a contractor and saw them mixing this white powder, and the contractor insisted it was the best glue ever. He was skeptical at first, but then saw the results and was amazed. He had to find out the name of the glue immediately, and it was our brand. It was fate that the recruitment agency offered him a job with us. Our glue is a powder glue, but it doesn't come in white. It's a brown powder. You can even see it in the videos all over the website. Story 21. Chef here. Have had some really ducking stupid and some just strange people. Some that come to mind are, guy comes in for an interview in the kitchen, sat him down, was about 2 minutes, and asking him about what he likes to cook, etc. And he just says, "Oh, I don't cook, I'm just here to get my dole." Right. Ended it there and called the dole office to report him. I don't mind if you're on the dole, but don't waste my damn time. Had a guy come in, did well in the interview, and even asked what he can work. Kitchen is open 12. 10, so need to be able to work 10, 12 at least. Says the hours are fine, so phone him and tell him he has the job, and tell him the hours for his first shift. Can't work that. Okay, fair enough. Tell him new hours a different day. Yeah, can't work that, right? What can you work? Can do from 12 to 5 Monday, Friday. What? No bye. Guy that completely lied on his CV, said he worked at a local family-owned restaurant for 5 years and helped develop the place completely. How the chef was really lucky to have him, etc. Well, that's interesting, I thought, as I have never ducking seen or heard of him and my family owned the place he said he worked. That was an interesting phone call I had with him. Even invited him for an interview and had my brother attend, who is the head chef at my family's place. Did not go well for him. Never seen a guy sink into his chair so much when he introduced himself. I was being interviewed once for a job, for a head chef's position, being prepared. I did my research and looked the place up on its Facebook and website. All good, until I see a picture of the kitchen team. One of the lads is someone I went to collage with, and I have tried to hit many times because he is a convicted pedo caught with thousands of indecent images on his computer and camera. Interview went great, got the job, and in the questions bit informed them of this fact. She was not happy about it as she lived there with her husband. By the time I got there to start, he was gone, never to return. Apparently, she went and started casually talking to him, then mentioned that I was starting, and he just panicked. Then she screamed at him to ducking bailout and never came back. Last I heard about him is he's back in jail. Fun times. Story 22. I worked at the London office of an international bank, and one that did not like spending money. They had a high turnover of staff. I was hired as a contractor, and the next week the other guy left while the manager was on holiday. I got quickly taken on perm, given responsibility of the department, and then they decided to hire a couple of trainees. One was the security guard, which is a whole other thread on its own, and the other was between this young lad from South London and another young lady from Spain. My boss, well, he still lived with his mother even though he was approaching 40. Damn, that man needed a spine transplant. Anyway, he asked me to sit in on the interview. The kid, he was probably 18, is a little too street and cocky, a little too much attitude, sitting back in the chair, legs crossed wide. My boss is bumbling through the interview, and so I jump in with a standard, "Where do you see your career going?" question. This kid just comes back with, "Well, I'll sit this gig out for a bit, but I'm going to be a monster DJ man in it, so won't be around too long, hopefully." My boss, he of no spine, just carries on with the next question, but I decide young feller needs a lesson in interview technique, so I interrupt the boss and ask a follow-up question. And why should we hire someone like you who's made it blatantly clear they'll be out the door, the first sniff of a gig at your local youth club? Why should we invest in someone our time when you don't actually seem to want to work in it? Kid starts giving me lip about my attitude towards him and rears up in his chair. Meanwhile, my boss mumbles on whilst I sit back and tell him I would not hire anyone with an attitude like he had and suggest he learn some interview etiquette before going anywhere else. Politely but firmly. He retorts with some big boy swears, and my boss, still mumbling, terminates the interview, thanking him for his time. We hired the young Spanish lady who, whilst coming in a lot of days stinking like she had been out on a bender most of the night, was ace. As for the lad Ministry of Sound, I believe, never called him after all. Story 23. Looked down the hall to see applicant in blue jeans playing on his phone. His application number came up and it was filled out in pencil. Went to save both of us time. And tell him no thanks, but he had decided to lay out for a nap across half the available chairs. He still got hired. Manager hire. Every day on the phone or asleep in the break room. He was still there when I left the company. Story 24. I'm a recruiter who works in a recruitment firm. I've been doing this for about 6 years and have seen some and been around some amazing stories. Here are some of the highlights. Project manager. Please keep in mind that this candidate had already passed a skills test with flying colors, and his resume has amazing experience, exactly what we were looking for. The interview was a rubber stamp. At the interview, he-man was dressed like a homeless person and smelled like he was rotting from the inside out. Interview rooms at an agency like mine are small, and we have many of them. This smell emptied out the entire area and had people reschedule their interviews to Starbucks, or for other days. It was like a mixture of feet, hot week-old diapers, and vomit. Sales manager. This guy is currently employed but wants to make a move. I had headhunted him out of his current job and was looking to move him to a competitor with a larger sales staff for more money. He wanted to interview early in the morning prior to his workday, and that was no problem. So I met him at my office at 8 o'clock. The issue was he had driven in, but was fall down drunk. Like just finished a 26 of rye for breakfast in the elevator up. He was actually getting drunker as I talked to him. These are just some of the standouts. I've been insulted and belittled, prepositioned and attempted to be bribed by candidates. There is a saying in recruitment, you have to kiss a lot of frogs. Story 25. Once interviewed a woman whose current job was to give interview training to the unemployed. She turned up in jeans and a jumper with a bag of shopping and spent the whole interview nervously shaking, sweating, and staring at the table. Literally couldn't believe it. Story 26. My time to shine. These come from my time as an agency. I can split my worst ones into 2 categories. Skin-crawlingly awkward and apocalyptically bad. First, Awkward. A woman came in for an interview, and her husband demanded that he be included in the interview. I refused twice, but after he started to raise his voice and complain, I said, "Duck it," and took them both into an interview room. She would start to ask a question. He would silence her and ask the same question. When I would ask her a question, he would answer before she had a chance. After I told him that this isn't his interview, and it's hers, he started sulking and, I assume, talking crap about me. Meanwhile, the wife is just shaking her head and I have a grimace on my face. So awkward. I felt terrible for her and was a hair away from punching her husband for his disrespect. The apocalyptically actual word? Bad one was when a woman came in reeking of menthol cigarettes and vodka. She also had the worst teeth I've ever seen on a human. They were like an addict, ate nothing but candy for a decade, and then rinsed with dip spit. This in itself wouldn't have made the interview that bad. What was worse was that she hadn't read the job description, had lied on her resume, and was combative when I asked about the most basic of skills. Asked to leave, she didn't get the job. Story 27. My job was to hire nurses for new physician practices. The medical management company I worked for was creating in small towns. One of these small towns in eastern Tennessee had little to no candidates apply for the job, so I decided to interview everyone that was minimally qualified and close geographically. First two interviews of the day are uneventful, but the third sticks out in my mind as the most mind-blowingly ridiculous excuse for a person I've ever seen. There is no office yet, so we agree to meet at the local Starbucks. I'm waiting, and around the corner comes a woman in her mid to late 30s with the longest, greasiest, most unkempt hair I have ever seen. It hangs down past her rear end and is loose, and clearly hasn't been washed in days, if not weeks. She has on gray sweatpants that couldn't have fit more than one more ounce of person in them, and white athletic socks. She also has on the highest pair of bright red escort heels I've ever seen, and every third or fourth step her ankles take turns rolling on her. I was waiting for the scream of agony. She decided her shirt for the day would be a shirt, complete with several holes near the untucked bottom of the shirt. That did not completely cover her very large stomach. The shirt was a picture of Tweety Bird and said, I taught a putty tat. She had on escort in church bright red lipstick and had a cigarette hanging out of the left side of her mouth. I honestly thought I was being punked. This position was not for an entry-level position. It was for an RN with at least 5 years experience and a nursing license in good standing. I made sure it was her and concluded the interview quickly with a, "Thanks for coming out, we'll be in touch." I strongly suspect that this was a box she needed checked off to continue receiving her unemployment check. Story 28. So I recently got to recruit for a position a lot higher than mine. I do project management, but without the title. Anyway, I interviewed this lady with my boss, and this older just bombed the interview process. She came in dressed in a very casual wear, like a muscle shirt with a logo and yoga pants, and her hair kind of a mess. Okay, no big deal, it's kind of windy. As we walk to the room, she starts asking me questions like, do you like your job? What do you dislike? What's base salary? No biggie, she just wants to get some insight. Well, once we sit down with my boss, the older lady starts to treat me like baby. Now I'm fairly young compared to the others you see doing my job. Her body language completely changed, and even her speech when talking to me. She turned her body to where I saw her shoulder, back. Even when I asked her questions, she wouldn't turn around, and would even interrupt me while I was asking questions. My boss took notice as well as to what was going on and would say, if you have any questions, let's try to hold it till the end. After 30 minutes of that, we decided to end the interview and thank her for her time. As you can guess, she didn't get a call back. Story 29. Did a phone interview with a guy whose resume said he lived a couple of hours from the job. It became obvious pretty quickly that he had just filled out the application without looking to see where we were. After asking him more than once if he knew where we were, and him not really giving a solid answer, I asked him directly about how he was going to manage the commute. He said that we weren't that far. When I told him where we were and how far away he was, there was a brief silence and he blurted out, "Crap, I'll move!" I told him to wait on a follow-up email to find out the next step. He did not move on to the next step. I liked the guy, though. Story 30. Not a recruiter or HR person. But the funniest interview moments came from my best friend in high school. In the first interview, she was applying for Quiznos. We had both been up all night doing Met. Yeah, I know, this was over a decade ago, and we left that behind in high school. Whenever she did Met, she went completely overboard on makeup. I was the one with a car, so I would drive her to her interviews and sit away from the interview, but was still within seeing and hearing distance. The manager at Quiznos was interviewing her, and she and I are facing each other from different tables, and the manager's back is to me. So he would ask a question, she would answer, and when he would look down to read the next question, her Met-induced nervous facial tic would happen. I can only describe it as the look on the cop's face in Dumb and Dumber when he drank the pee. Whenever the manager would look up, her face would return to normal. So she got the job and ended up getting fired because she ran out from the back after cutting her finger open in front of a crowded room screaming, "What do I do?" That, and when she got fired, the manager told her they took her off the schedule, and she said, "Yes, I was going to ask if I could go to the lake this weekend." He was like, "No, you're off the schedule permanently." The next job interview I went with her to, we weren't high. She had applied to a coffee shop, and the interviewer asked what she would like best about working there, and she said, "The whipped cream." Later, she got a job with me at a restaurant as a hostess and was fired for not wearing underwear while wearing a skirt, and her tampon fell out. And also the fact that she showed up with the most enormous hickeys I have ever seen. She's a psychologist now. Story 31. I was hiring for a sales position at my company. The guy I was interviewing was going great, and he was really good and knew his stuff. I mentally had a plan to call him the next day to offer him a job. As standard procedure, the last question I ask is, "Did you have any questions?" to gain insight and also to obviously answer questions. The guy says, "If I offer you a block of hash, will that give me a foot in the door?" The company has a strict no-tolerance substances policy. So I said no thanks and tossed his resume and interview. Story 32. Was an IT recruit. One day I get a CV, resume, of a guy claiming to have a PhD in computer science aged just 19 from one of Cambridge's top colleges. Assumed it was a lie. Later that day, an awkward client insisting on people with strong degrees rings me, and I mention this chap out of desperation. I had sent many people their way, but they always wanted too much. Anyway, they get very excited about this prospect, so I get him checked out. He faxes his cert and proves himself legit, so I call him up. And that's where the fun started. You see, it seems that this whiz was also Beavis incarnate. I mean, he literally talked just like him with all the cool, inane mutterings, just with a British accent. For someone seemingly so intelligent, I was amazed at how retarded he came across. Conversing with him was tormenting. You'd be talking to him about the role, and he would be splackmaning throughout, and I honestly thought it a wind-up. But when questioned on what he did at uni, he would chuckle away with the most extreme technobabble interspersed, by these Tourette's-type verbal tics, yet all seemingly legitimate. And then he would randomly burst into splackmans whilst I was talking about what the company did, which was not in any way funny. I told the client that I didn't think him suitable for the role, but no matter, they insisted on seeing him. 15 minutes after the interview started, the phone rang, and the client asking me, "What the heck was that you sent in here?" Their parameters for the role changed shortly after. Interestingly, this was in 1992. According to Wikipedia Frog Baseball, Mike Judge's first outing for Beavis and Butthead was also 1992, and aired a few months after my encounter with this complete arseburger. I wonder if this is where he found his calling. Story 33. My former manager at SAP, software solution company, had an amazing interview with a candidate that still makes me laugh. It was for a sales support job. At a company like this, it's the kind of role that would be a great stepping stone for a future career. So a lot of candidates came in prepared, wearing proper interview attire, had printed out resumes and references, etc. So after a day full of interviewing people like that, in walks a girl in jeans and a hoodie. My manager, a bit confused, starts to ask her questions about what she knows about project management, software, etc. The girl, also a bit confused, replies, nothing really, but I really love animals. I have 2 cats. My manager, even more confused than before, asks how this girl thinks her education and experience might be suited for the job. The girl answers, "Well, though I don't have any specific veterinary training, I did work at a pet store when I was in high school and learned a lot about caring for different types of animals." My manager finally realizes what's happening. This girl thought SAP was the SPCA, and that she was applying for a job at an animal shelter. She burst into laughter and said, "Sorry, but I think we've got our wires crossed. This is for a sales support job at software company." The girl left thoroughly embarrassed, and we still laugh about this when I see my old colleagues. Before you ask how this could even happen, this was a contractor position that was being staffed by an external temp agent. It turns out the regular temp agency subcontracted this work out to a different temp agent. They subcontracted out their own subcontract. So I don't blame the girl, though she should have done her research. I entirely blame the temp agency for not doing their job. Story 34. I was interviewing a gentleman for a position at my hotel in security. I set up the Skype interview. As soon as we connected, there was a lot of loud commotion from his room he was in. He was yelling at his wife and daughter in his language. I think he was telling them to give him some space because he had the interview. His daughter was hysterically crying and would not leave him alone. His wife kept trying to pull her away, but she'd break free, hit him, which only made him yell more. She, the daughter, tried to take the tablet away. The guy tried to push through the interview. I only got through about 5 questions. He constantly got up and yelled at his family because they wouldn't leave him alone. It was very awkward. Bonus, this was when I was the candidate being interviewed. They had called me at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. their time, for a phone interview. I had worked a night shift the night before and was awoken out of my beauty sleep. They asked me if I wanted to reschedule the interview, but old dummy here wanted to do or pass, so I decided to go forward with the interview. It lasted all of 10 minutes because I was too out of it to come up with good answers. I made a bad joke of how I hope to one day be in a position to call and wake people up for interview. I still cringe thinking about that interview. Story 35. I don't think this dude ever had an actual interview. I worked at a big box store because, like everyone there other than management, we couldn't find better jobs at the time. For retail, they paid decently, so most people took the interviews seriously, dressed nice, etc. Not this dude. He comes up to my area, tech bench, and asks where to go for an interview. He's wearing jeans hanging off his ass, baggy cartoon shirt, basketball shoes, and a baseball cap with a sticker on it. All very expensive brands and brand new, but still unprofessional even for a big box. This is not in my normal wiring, but he seemed like a decent kid outside of this. So to help him out, I told him he was not going to get hired if he didn't dress professionally. We would get him rescheduled, and he needed to come in wearing business casual at least. He doesn't say much, agrees, and leaves. I worked a later shift and came in to see him leaving his failed interview, wearing more expensive, slightly less falling off his ass jeans, a more expensive, slightly less baggy shirt, really expensive jacket, and a different hat and expensive pair of shoes. A $30 Walmart business casual outfit would have gotten him a decent job. But instead, he came in wearing an outfit that cost more than my wardrobe and was probably confused as to why he didn't get hired. Story 36. I've had a lot of bad interviews because of HR recruit. The problem for me has been that most HR recruiters are certified HR specialists and aren't technical specialists. They often can't tell the difference between certain very technical skills and don't know if they're job specific or not. The worst I ever had was a girl who must have been right out of college, maybe 22 or 23. I was being interviewed for a more senior position, but she kept asking me irrelevant questions, especially to the role. Had I ever used Stata? How many classes in econometrics had I completed? The thing is, the job is in no way related to economics or econometrics, but she asked about my knowledge of economics. I had done 2 graduate-level econ courses, MPL, ATC, etc., etc. Eventually, I had to ask her why this was necessary, as I had been led to believe that this position was not an economics role. She begins to get flustered and annoyed and thanks me for coming in. I leave with the impression that the company didn't know what the hell was going. I get a call 2 or 3 weeks later from that recruiter without so much as an explanation, where she begins to rattle off questions at rapid fire. She says they'd like to interview me, but I politely declined. She called me 2 or 3 times after that, and then I found she left the company. Sometimes it's not always the fault of the interviewee. Story 37. Not exactly what we're looking for here, but a similar story. Pretty funny. I had a good talk with an HR director for the manufacturing portion of a pharmaceutical plant, and he told me this. Right now, we're hiring anybody who can show up to a job interview currently sober, not dirty or smelly, and not currently wanted for arrest. Low standards, I know, but you'd be surprised how few people aren't one or more of those things. They were hiring with the lowest standards possible, and were having a hard time finding people who could even meet that. Story 38. I was a department manager at a retail store years ago, and at one point the store manager let me know there was going to be an interview that day to fill an empty position in my department, which had been open forever because retail is terrible. Since I was the one that had been covering most of those shifts, I was very excited to finally get somebody. Later that day, this distinguished-looking older dude walks in wearing a suit and tie and carrying a briefcase. I found out later he had been laid off from a fairly high-up corporate gig somewhere and hadn't looked for a job in something like 15 years. The first thing I said was, "You know this job pays barely over minimum wage, right?" And he didn't believe me. He thought I was trying to get rid of him because he was an older guy. He kept saying, "Look, I can do the job, I'm in shape." I had to drag one of my people over and have him tell the guy what he actually made. I still remember the guy saying, "But how does anyone live on that?" It wasn't a horrible interview, but to this day, the way his face looked as he was sitting there trying to figure out how to restructure his lifestyle to live on probably half of what he used to make really stuck with me. Like he hadn't realized how truly ducked he was until some damn kid explained it to him. He ended up passing on the job. Story 39. I've been in HR a while and have seen some interesting things. But the worst interview I've ever conducted was when I had a guy who worked at a different branch of my company show up in jeans and a wife beater with his mother in tow. I tried to take him into the interview without her, but she just followed him into the room. Weird, but whatever. If he got a job with the other branch, there must be a reason, right? Wrong. Every time I tried to ask him a question, he'd just look at her and wait for her to respond. When I asked how he would diffuse an angry client, he looks at Mom, and she just says, "Nobody could ever be angry at my son, so it doesn't matter." When I asked what his toughest day at work was like, Mom just says, "He might cry at his desk, but all you have to do is hug him for a while and he'll be fine." Dude was 32. I called the branch he worked at to see why he was looking to transfer and why they hired him in the first place. Turns out his mom used to work at the branch and was sleeping with a higher up. So nepotism got him the job. He was trying to transfer because Mom had gotten fired. And so now the branch was too emotional. He did not get the job, and was eventually let go for poor job performance. Story 40. A girl who showed up in moon boots and a fluffy gilet for a front-of-house role. She chewed gum the whole time, and when I asked a bit about her work history, she started talking about how she'd been to see Bombfunk MMCS the other night, and how she was a massive, obsessive fan. Okay, bear in mind they're one-hit wonder, from what I know, from like 1999. This interview was at least 4 years later. What happened? Did they just turn up and play Freestyler 12 times, and then everyone went home? So, yeah, I'm all for honesty, but would you pay this person money to represent you or your company? Unless you're Bombfunk McCS, I'd hazard a guess most people would swerve that mess. Story 41. I had a recent college grad interview for a job. Asked if we had a nap room. Said his doctor required him to take an hour nap a day. If he got hired, he will provide the appropriate medical records, but requires a nap room. He also asked if, when he got hired, if he would be one of the bosses of the developers who interviewed him. I asked why, and he said he felt off about the developer and said he would let him go. He then asked where his office would be located and whether they would compensate him with stock options or ownership. Finally, he ended the interview saying he had a 3 p.m. appointment, and it was nice talking to me. I asked him to leave. He was applying for an entry-level support analyst. Story 42. I was scheduled to be the first interviewer for a guy that was coming in once. Har meets with them first to go over paperwork and other prep stuff, then hands them off to the interviewers. So I'm waiting, and the HR rep comes to my office and says, "There won't be any interview today, so your hour is free." I said, "Oh, did he have to reschedule?" It happens, people get sick, have emergencies, can't get away from their current job. It's really no big deal to reschedule. She says, no, closes my door, and sits like she's about to bust if she doesn't tell someone. Apparently, as she was doing prep paperwork with the applicant, he started hitting on her, very aggressively, demanding her phone number, wanting to know when she was free to go out, not taking no or even "I'm married" for an answer, and eventually saying, "I'm not leaving today without your phone number." She got him back out at the front desk and had him wait there while she called building security to escort him out. That wasn't even the end of him. The guy kept applying for positions in the company. I'd see his resume come up again and again. Story 43. Worked as a manager for a small company. I did preliminary interviews. Guy shows up in jeans and a plain white t-shirt an hour early to the interview. There's no chairs in the tiny front office, so he has to stand there awkwardly while other applicants come and go. Finally, as I call him to the back office, I notice that he's got a pair of boobs tattooed on the side of his neck. I know this interview is going to go nowhere. My district manager isn't going to hire a guy with bare breasts on his neck, but I have to do the interview anyway. He proceeds to interrupt me every other sentence as I'm explaining the job duties and expectations, because he has a friend in the same industry and knew all about it. His answers to my interview questions ramble on without pause for me to cut in. The interview lasts twice as long as any of the others that day, and I even skipped some of the questions. I couldn't stop staring at his tits. Story 44. 1. Woman shows up to a 1 p.m. interview at 4:30 p.m. with no apologies or excuse. We shredded her resume at that point and had to print a new copy. She seemed like she didn't know which job she was applying for. Quickest and easiest, thank you but no interview I've had. 2. Dude shows up looking like he's high and seems like the most shallow human being on earth, not in a vain meaning, but in a way that there was zero depth to the guy. What you saw is what you got. Answered the question of, what were your responsibilities at your previous job? With, I did stuff. I gave every chance to the guy and tried to lead him into answering questions the best I could, but he was either high or plain old stupid. Story 45. Sounds lame compared to all the replies I've read here. Guy was fresh out of college, applying for a network support position. He'd be on my team, so I spent about a half hour interviewing him. I mention a few terms and note that he's answering everything affirmatively, but it seems like he isn't processing it. He's just agreeing so he doesn't look dumb. So I ask him a question about subnetting, and he says he knows he learned it in school, but he doesn't remember. I ask about TCP and UDP, and he gives the same answer. I point to his resume where he says he has strong skills in TCP, UDP, and network configuration. He says that those lines are still true because he did know it at one point. He just doesn't know it anymore. I mentioned that a resume is supposed to be skills you currently have, not skills you could potentially have. And he gets all moody and defensive, mentally shuts down. He starts acting like he knows he's not going to get the job, and it's because I don't like him, and it's not fair. So my half hour comes up. I shake his hand, and I hand him off to the next interviewer with an, as far as I can tell, he has no skills whatsoever. Story 46. I interviewed a woman for an IT position. A few minutes in, she started rubbing one of her eyes. Within a few minutes, it was all red and started to swell. She kept rubbing at it and rubbing at it. By the end of the interview, she couldn't see out of the eye at all, and a huge whitehead had formed on her eyelid. But the whole time, she never acknowledged the problem, even though I asked if she was okay. When the interview wrapped up, she tried to shake my hand with the same hand she had been rubbing all over her disease-infested eyeball. I politely declined. She didn't get the job. Story 47. Not an HR recruiter, but at my wife's company, 3 dudes left with a stolen customer list and tried to start a company in direct competition with the wife's company. One of the dudes was supposed to bankroll the new company, but he couldn't come up with the cash, so the other 2 dudes dumped him. The dumped dude tried interviewing with the wife's company to try to get his job back. Story 48. Not a pro recruiter, but had my share of fun ones. As a restaurant manager, I had an interview scheduled at 3 p.m. At about 2, it slowed down a bit, so I sat at an out-of-the-way table to observe everything and get some paperwork done. Right at 3, a guy who had been drinking at the bar for a couple hours finished his beer and then asked who he is supposed to see for his interview. He smelled like a brewery. I politely told him thanks, but no thanks. I checked his tab after he left. He had 6 beers while he was waiting. When I was on an interview panel for a clerk position in the sheriff's office, I had a lady start the interview by asking if it was a problem that she had an active warrant. We told her to go across the hall to the court clerk and get it taken care of right away. I was interviewing a high school kid for a community service officer position, and I asked him what activities he was into. He responded that he really liked smoking. Story 49. HR manager and recruiter in Mexico here. In my first recruiting job, I had to hire people for a private security company, which is a very basic position here. The kind of just is alive. Don't have a criminal record? Hired. I had this one guy come in the office with his wife, and we start the interview. All okay at this point. When it comes to requirements and image, I tell him that he have to cut his hair, shoulder length to a buzz cut. The client asking for the personnel was very strict about personal appearance. Oh no, miss, I would not cut it. I have it long because it's a vow I made to the Guadalupana, and I rather keep it than work. So that's it. 3 kids and unemployed wife, but with a very strong religious commitment. Story 50. So many, the amount of people who bring their entire family to the job interview. Please never do this. It is so completely unprofessional and uncomfortable for everyone involved, including your poor family who have to sit in the lobby and wait. We've had a guy interview high out of his mind and called back later to admit to us and apologize for being high on meth while being interviewed. We've had a guy come in with a resume that read complete with bomb-making skills. He thought we were a modeling agency and left quite quickly after he realized we were not. We called the cops based on his resume. Even small things like people who have taken off their shoes while being interviewed, people spitting out their gum into our complimentary coffee mid-interview, etc. We had one guy who was a great guy in the interview, but when we ran his crim check, it turned out he had hit someone and been in jail for 15 years. So many. Story 51. Worked for a family-owned daycare my senior year of high school. Moved to full-time when I graduated. Owner has me interview a late 20s woman for a part-time afternoon helper position, meaning whatever room we needed her in is where she would go. I start telling her about the daycare. We had kids aged from newborn to 11, before and after school. I'm telling her things the job requires. Waking kids up from nap, sending them to potty, changing diapers, getting snack, playground when the weather cooperates, etc. She says, well, I don't change diapers, and I don't wipe butts. I don't really like going outside. Kids are loud. I ask what she thought a helper in a daycare was going to be doing. She replies, I don't know, watch TV and stuff. I just ended the interview. She asked when she should call and find out her hours. I said, that's not going to happen. Thanks for coming in. She was pissed. Called my boss to complain about how rude I was. Story 52. Okay, not an HR person, but I was, part of a group, interviewing someone. It was an audition for a TV commercial. Auditions can be soul-sucking. Acting is not for everyone. It was for a middle-aged woman who was supposed to be a brassy shopkeeper who was supposed to belt out a few lines from a Bob Fosse musical. Sadly, we were not videotaping. But when one hopeful threw out her arms and did her big finish, the casting agent's dog, who had been sitting quietly until now, leaped up and bit the woman on the boob. I feel bad about it now, but we just fell about the place. She, on the other hand, wasn't so impressed. Story 53 was hiring truck drivers in the Northeast U.S. I had a guy who took the application off-site and brought it back. His application was pretty impressive. When we interviewed him, we found out that 1, he could barely read and write. He had his GF fill out the application, and 2, his GF had lied about the 90% of his work experience. So, tell us about your time as a driver at Company XX. What kind of truck and what was your route? I just drove the truck, man. I don't remember all the much. It was a big truck. I do know what. When did you get your CDI out? While back. I don't have it with me, though. It's at home locked up. I was interviewing him with another guy, and we just kept going at him for sport. Poor guy had no clue what was going on. Story 54. I used to manage an engineering department for a manufacturing facility. The software we used was industry-specific, so it was a fairly small community. Anyway, I interviewed this one guy. Seemed pretty good on paper. A little quiet during the interview, but you know, engineers. Anyway, I get done, and I'm thinking of making him an offer. One of my staff pulls me aside after he leaves and says, you remember that coworker I told you about? The one that was arrested and served time for raping his daughters? Yeah, that was him. I'm not telling you what to do, but I won't work with that guy. Yeah, solve that one for me. Also taught me a lesson early in my career to vet any prospects with my current staff. Story 55. Well, I was the one being interviewed, and I'm a nervous guy. So when I was leaving, I said, "Thank you for time," and the interviews got a really weird look and said, "No, thank you for your time." I'm getting better at peopling, I swear. Story 56. Not HR, but had to interview people for a help desk position in 2005-ish. Dude comes in, kind of odd, but whatever. Has a strange, halting way of speaking, which now I would equate with a neckbeard, oddest. I ask the second question, and his phone rings. He takes it out, something with a stylus. Don't even remember what kind of phones there were then. Holds up his finger and says, "One moment, please." I looked at the co-interview and mouthed, "I'm done." Story 57. I was interviewing for a recruitment agency for general labor position. Generally, all the people that applied were either ex-cons or new immigrants. I had a walk-in one day. He was a really sketchy and shady-looking First Nation guy. I sat him down at my desk and looked over his application form. He was about 26 or so, but looked much older. On the form, there was a section stating whether or not you had a criminal record, and if so, what it was for. I asked what his record was for, and he said, "I beat my girlfriend, then beat the cops." I said, okay, in a tone indicating I had done the same thing the weekend before. I later checked his record and found he had 27 different cases. Did not hire. Story 58. I'm a chemist. A couple years back, relatively new out of school, I had a phone interview with a company for a synthetic chemist, talked about experience, and then he wanted to ask a few chemistry questions. How would you separate benzoic acid, aniline, and phenol? Just not being in the right frame of mind for this, I answered distillation. I was all geared up to answer synthetic questions, not really purification questions. I knew in the moment that their boiling points were really close together, and distillation would never work. I just didn't have an alternate answer, so figured a crafty answer is better than "I'm not sure." But I essentially just freaked out from there. No more questions, and got the "okay, we'll call you if you're one of the final candidates." Story 59. Late to the dance party on this one, the worst interview I've had to do. The worst was a technical support position for incoming phones, chat system, and emails was a deaf lady. Couldn't turn her down since Auta. So we get in there, and we couldn't just get over the fact that she couldn't do 33% of the job. She couldn't be on phones. And she was a nice enough lady, seemed to have some general qualifications. So it broke my heart when at the end she's like, "Is there anything I could have done better to successfully receive this position?" And there was only one thing she couldn't do. I've had other bad ones, but that was the worst. Story 60. Had a recent interview for a programmer where the guy came in dressed like a pimp or club owner. He had on khaki shirt, khaki jeans, and expensive leather shoes. He didn't wear a tie, but had a huge gold cross on a heavy gold chain, plus several large gold rings. He insisted we call him TJ. Some of the questions he refused to answer, stating they were too simple, or "Really? Really, you going to ask me that?" He insulted our Linux admin when he introduced himself like, "My name is Raymond, and I am the senior Linux man on the team." I'm sorry. His salary demands were outrageous, like a good 50% more than top industry standards for the area for the position he was paying for. Story 61. I had to sit in on a group interview for our emergency dispatch center. We're interviewing this white lady from Montana, or Idaho, or Utah, one of those states, who had experience with the job and everything was going well. Until one of the questions from the book that we have from HR is, "Are you experienced with communicating with people from diverse and low-income backgrounds?" Her reply, "Oh yeah, I deal with coons all the time." My supervisor ended the interview right there. Story 62. Not an interview, but here's a resume we received. We were looking for a salesperson to handle software consulting services in the Northeast region. From July of 2003 up until October of 2014, when the store owner passed and the store was closed, I worked as a salesman and a stocker for Frank's Bedding and Furniture, a small store located at Kensington Avenue in Philadelphia, PA. That's it. That's the whole resume, verbatim and without edits. Story 63. On Thursday, my boss, myself, and another team member got together to conduct some phone interviews. One of the candidates was absolutely awful. We told her up front that we only had 30 minutes and 7 simple questions, the first of which was, "Tell us a little about yourself." She answered this in the form of a 10-minute monologue about her career, which had nothing to do with our field. Subsequent questions went the same way. We had to cut her off when she started talking about how she's a single mom and how she needs the job to support her son, who is 24 years old. Straight to the reject pile. Story 64. Hope I am not too late. I remember going to a Foot Locker, shoe store, while job searching, and I was totally caught off guard. I handed the manager my resume, and she asked if I could do an interview right then. I agreed, but was insanely nervous, as it would have been my first job. Her first question was, "Why do you want to work here?" And I completely froze up, and after a bit of stumbling, I finally replied, "Because I like shoes." We stare blankly at each other for what seems like eternity, and finally she responds, "We will call if you get the job." I did not get the job. Story 65. I was in on an interview with my manager for someone I would train. She was so overwhelmed with her personal life that she started crying in the interview. I was a no. He was a yes. We spent thousands training her, including me flying to her location to spend a week there, and she left within the year. Side note, in that week I spent training her, I got to see her desk and the many, many pictures of her with her many, many cats. Disclaimer, she was a nice person and could have done the job. Also, I actually love cats, but more than 10 is too many. Story 66. I just remembered another good one. We were interviewing for database administrators and had a decently qualified female applicant, which HR always pushed to the top. So this woman comes in and she looks like something from a hippie music festival. Dreadlocks, huge ear gate, a nose ring so large it clicked against her teeth when she talked, smelled like she never bathed, and was wearing a gauzy, transparent peasant dress with no underwear. She literally might as well have been wearing mosquito netting. She didn't get far in the interview loop either. Story 67. I once sat in on a few interviews at my old company in Denver. This one guy came in, and instead of wowing us with his skills, he went off on a sob story about how he'd been out of work for 6 months. Had special needs kids and a wife to take care of and just really needed the job, man. I felt bad for the guy, but I just wanted to run away from the interview by the time it was done. Story 68. Didn't actually interview the guy, but it was a person who I gave a small coding test to. Web development. First of all, they didn't even do the test. It was something completely unrelated, and it was busted. Second, in their JavaScript, they had a random unused file there with a piece of code. Was the code that was in the file. Needless to say, we didn't call them back. Also, fun fact, the guy had like 3 different versions of jQuery loaded on the same page. Story 69. This was my own interview. I used to live in an area with 4 towns smushed together. It wasn't unusual for street names to be duplicated, yet totally unconnected to each other. I put in my interview location in my GPS, got in my car, and ended up in the middle of ducking nowhere. I called the interviewer in tears explaining what was happening, and she had to give me directions. I aced the interview, got hired. Sometimes a screw-up is understandable if you own up to it. Story 70? I was the interviewee. I grossly overestimated the traffic getting there, so I arrived 30 minutes early to the interview. Thought about going to get some food, but I didn't want to risk getting something on my freshly dry-cleaned jacket. So I ended up falling asleep. Woke up to a guy looking weirdly at me in the parking lot while he was walking in. No biggie, I woke up just in time. Turns out that guy was my interviewer. Cue obvious BS questions with a "this isn't going to happen" on Story 71. Had a guy in a phone interview tell me how he never got calls back from recruiters because they must think his attitude sucks and he hates people, but he doesn't really. He said he has a great attitude. This was after his 4th F-bomb. He then complained about how he never got any of those jobs because women were the ones. Yeah, he didn't get hired. I'm a dude. I wonder how he'll spin that one. Story 72. Interviewee. I was interviewing for this company, and at the end we get up to give our salutations, and the VP of the company exclaims, "Look how tiny you are. I bet I could fit my hands around your waist," and proceeds to put his hands around my waist to test out his theory as I'm frozen in shock, looking at his wife, the president of the company. Story 73. I was working at a staffing agency about 10 or 12 years ago. One girl came in wearing a midriff-bearing, spaghetti-strapped tank top with bra straps hanging out. Her neck and chest had hickeys all over, and her arms had definite track marks. She sat in the chair with her knees up by her chin and wouldn't make eye contact. She spoke like she had just shot up some substance. Not a good interview. Story 74. Not a HR recruiter, but I once had a group interview where we were asked to talk about something which we were passionate about. Every single one of the other 11 people said either sports or travel. I was last and thought, this is my chance to stand out, and therefore said, I'm passionate about how in the future, all menial jobs will be carried out by robots. I then spoke for 2 minutes on the subject. I was interviewing for a position as a checkout worker. Story 75. Not a recruiter, but I witnessed a horrible interview, you could call it that. The opening was for retirement fund advisor. There weren't many requirements to be sure, as it was mostly sales, and anyone could learn both that, and the specifics of the business if they meant to. There was this guy who went into the interview with torn jeans, an ice cream cone in his hand, and a sleeveless shirt, whose first and only concern was, what's the pay? He didn't last 1 minute. Story 76. There was a small group of us interviewing this guy for an engineering role. He seemed intelligent and was doing well with the interview. Then one of the panelists asked him what his favorite color was and why. I gave him a, "Why on earth would you ask such a dumb question?" look. His answer was red. The dumbest question of the interview turned out to be the most telling. Story 77. I have a lodge where the only way to arrive is by boat, where you then walk up from the dock by a series of stairs. I once heard a woman yelling from below at the dock, waving a piece of paper. I went down to meet an overweight woman, trying to give me her resume for a job at the lodge, as she mentions she couldn't possibly make it up the stairs to hand it to me. Story 78. Used to work as the recruiter for a market research firm in Ottawa, Canada. A female applicant did not make the cut, and then proceeded to make multiple phone calls with death threats and screaming. A police visit and a registered cease and desist letter ended that adventure. Other worse one were foreign PhDs and medical doctors being forced to do market research phone calls because their licenses weren't recognized in Canada. Story 79. Probably mine. I had an interview at a fast food place. I came in with no experience. I told them I didn't handle well under stress. I was introverted, and right now, can't even think of one reason they hired me. Still got the job, though. Story 80. Crap. My GF graduated college with top marks and internship experience, and she still can't get a job despite the great interview. This thread just made her feel even worse. Story 81. Just last week, actually. My coworker apparently didn't do a thorough enough interview prep. One of his candidates thought business casual meant to wear his nice khaki cargo shorts. Instead of bringing the resume that my coworker prepared for him, he hand-copied that resume onto notebook. In the words of the hiring manager, illegible. This was for a high-level banking job. Story 82. Not in HR, but was in on a final interview with a candidate who nailed it then at the very end as we are chatting about life and how great the team is, etc. He describes that he rents out some rooms in his house to college freshman co-eds, and sometime we'll have to have a party at his house. Story 83. I was hiring for a position that involved working with children, and I had one lady show up with 2 bags of bottles and cans she had collected on the way over. She confessed that she had recently been arrested for an offense, but it was just escort, so that was fine. Story 84. Not HR, but was hiring for SysOps in a startup. Guy came in and interviewed awesomely. Went to offer him the job and asked for him to fill out the background check form. He then replies, "Oh, I hoped a startup wouldn't do the background check. I have 12 Deweys. We didn't hire him." Story 85. I'm an engineer and do technical interviews. In one case, I had a woman interview for a technical purchasing position buying electrical components and could not identify a fuse. In another one, I interviewed a subject matter expert, a guy, on logistics who tried to tell me that a fully laden 18-wheeler gets 20 mpg. Story 86. Interviewing a guy for an engineering position. When it got time to asking the famous, name a time you had to deal with a difficult situation at work, his response was, one time I had to work for a lady boss. HR rep, female, was in the room. That didn't go over well. Story 87. Not a recruiter, just a regular interviewer. We were doing a technical interview, and when the candidate didn't know what to do for the question, he would lay his head against the wall and start hitting himself with his hands, and then hitting his head into the wall. I wasn't sure what to do. Story 88. Have to say this, not HR, but watched a guy walk into where I work for an interview. He was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Things that get my banana hard." He didn't even get the job. Recruiters of Reddit, what is the one instant turnoff that people still have on their resume? People who tie themselves in knots to fit exactly into whatever resume template they are using. Combining jobs because you want to list 4, but the template has space for 3. Using a template with like 8 bullet points for awards, and digging so deep you're listing second grader of the month May 1992. I usually point to the offending section and ask, what are you trying to tell the person reading this? And if you can't answer that question, it doesn't need to be there. Story 2. Typos, irrelevant information especially. Recently, a resume came in that had the person's name, contact info, high school info, and 1 job experience. McDonald's. We loved it. It's all we needed to know. Compared to Mr., I like to take long walks on the beach. We really don't have time to read even the page you submit, so if it has to be a page, it better be good. Also, we had a guy send a 5-page resume, which is extreme, but it was for a higher position, still 5 pages. The kicker is that one of the pages was a full-blown headshot selfie. He didn't get a callback. Story 3. I had a resume once state for work experience being hacker, the internet. Other gems included in the resume were, I've been both fired and hired for hacking various things. I've never been convicted of a computer crime. I will admit it gave me a chuckle, but certainly was a deterrent for the job. Story 4. Not common. But a couple months ago, this kid applied to my clinic for assistant stuff. The damn thing was in Comic Sans. Yuck. I actually felt bad, so I sent him an email with small pointers and improvements he could do on his resume, doing my civic duty. Story 5. My friend had someone come into his work with a resume a few years back. One of the achievements he had listed was able to walk extremely long distances without getting tired. He was applying at a millwork finishing shop. Story 6. Former recruiter. The only thing I don't already see mentioned here already is a mission statement for a totally different industry. Looking for an exciting career in zookeeping, while applying to an office job is a great way to see that you're going to leave as soon as you get the job you actually wanted. To a lesser extent, also really vague mission statements. That shows you have no idea what you want, which can be fine in some contexts, but is going to lose out to someone who knows they want the job in question. If you're trying to create a generic resume, just leave that bit out. If you know what type of career you're looking for, it's maybe worth including. Story 7. A cover letter or objective that is all about what the job can do for you. I'm a recent graduate seeking a role where I can apply my knowledge and grow my career. I'm looking to learn new skills and be challenged and to enjoy the work I do. I'm so pleased to hear what you want. What can you offer me? Ask not what your employer can do for you, ask what you can do for your employer. Story 8. I'm not a recruiter, but I have been in charge of hiring, and I hate objectives. They're useless and waste space, in my opinion. Also, I don't like repetitive bullet points. If you did the same thing at a bunch of different jobs, mix it up and show me what other things you did at the jobs. They're not deal breakers, of course, just annoyances. Story 9. I hire a lot of front-end developers and UI, UX designers. About a quarter of the resumes I consider have a portfolio or personal site link that is dead. Make sure your site is live before you send out your resume. Story 10. Unprofessional emails. It takes 2 minutes to set up a new one. No need to keep the one you set up at 15. If you would be embarrassed for someone to read it aloud in front of an office full of people, get a new one. Cliché action words with no purpose to. I'm looking for skills on a curriculum vitae, not to see if you're a dynamic, friendly person who likes to hang out with friends and go to the movies. Team player, but can work well on my own. We all can, a CV can't prove that. It takes a recruiter 30 secs to read a CV. I want your experience to jump out at me. Lengthy, wordy CVs make me want to put it to the back of the pile. I'm not reading 10 pages of a project you did 15 years ago whilst on your placement year. If you have the experience, I'll be calling you to find out more. So keep it all relevant and but to the point. 2 pages for a low-level role, 4 tops for management. Story 11. I've spent years eyeballs deep in a couple of much-beloved MMOs. I've been there, pulled the all-nighters, rolled on the loot. I get it. So I can almost understand the temptation, but please don't start banging on about how leading your guild and planning raid strategies is remotely connected to the job you're applying for. Story 12. My brother works at Camping World and told me someone wrote on their resume, "If you don't want me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." Who the heck puts that on a resume? What does that have to do with goddamn Camping World? She was 29 years old. Story 13. A lot of things. They put a list of hobbies irrelevant to the position. I absolutely don't care if you are a great football player. Unprofessional pictures. I cannot even remember the approximate amount of resumes with people who clearly had a lot of likes in a particular pic from Facebook on a wedding who crop it and paste it on the resume while looking at least a little wasted, hoping to receive the same recognition they got on social media. I personally don't care about the photo, but there are a lot of recruiters who still do, so I advise that if you want your picture on your resume, pay a photographer for a professional portrait. If you don't have the money to do that, just stand in front of a white wall with a white shirt and have someone take a photo of you from your chest up. Convert it to black and white, and there you have it. Recruiters receive so many resumes that we don't care about the introduction, so many people write. A lot of the candidates give of themselves. I am a focused person, yada yada. We check out the experience first. If it makes sense with the job, then we will call you. It's more about compatibility than presentation. I don't know why there are so many typos in professional resumes. That's always a turnoff for some positions. When it's obvious that the resume was designed by the candidate on PowerPoint or Photoshop. Those have a lot of banners with stupid word art typography. I can't tell you how terrible this looks. It's better if you just write it down without any format on Word. And it's even better if you spend $5 on a template. Leave design to the designers. When it's more than 3 pages long, which is still too long. No matter who you are, you can compact your whole experience in 2 pages. Not many people realize this, but you can't expect the recruiter to read all of your resume with caution. When they have 99 more resumes for the same position, and you have to hire someone really soon. So if your resume is 10 pages long, and a lot of them are, that can actually hurt you. Story 14. This one goes out to you designers out there. I'm not a recruiter at all, but I have worked with some well-respected graphic designers throughout university and during my career who have been in the field for many years. Now, as graphic designers, your resume is the recruiter's first taste at your design skill. That being said, I've seen many new designers put a chart displaying their efficiency in various Adobe or design skill. A person I've talked to who hires designers hates when people do this. Oftentimes, you will be doing yourself more harm than good by showing your skill set like this. Simply stating your professional skills and not ranking yourself will always be the better choice. Let your portfolio show your levels of proficiency. Story 15. Ridiculous corporate jargon. In my last position, I leveraged synergies between business units to create value and a win-win scenario, which empowered other business units to think outside the box and take a deep dive into core competencies to create buy-in and game-changing results. Story 16. I interview candidates for entry-level positions that require some light computer operations ability. People in this position use a computer to input reports and attach items to documents in a way very similar to how email works. This part of the job is something any 10-year-old in America could be taught to do. One candidate attached a resume file written in a version of WordPerfect from the 1980s. The file was unreadable. But he was a recommendation from one of our senior managers, so I called him anyway. I set up the interview appointment, and he sounded excited to come in. I told him to bring a physical paper copy of his resume into the interview. He seemed very distressed by this request and said, "I'll see what I can do." The next day, he shows up for his interview. He hands me a sheet of paper that looks like a passable resume format, and I set it aside to look at later. Then we do the interview. He's a nice guy, and I don't hate him, but he's very obviously wrong for the job. I thank him for his time and let him know we'll be getting back to him soon. I spend a minute thinking about how I'm going to explain to the senior manager who recommended this guy that he's not going to work out. And I'm more than a little annoyed that said manager would even suggest this guy as a candidate in the first place. While I'm thinking about all of this, the candidate sticks his head back into the office. I say, "Hello again." He says, "Hey, sorry, but I forgot something." I glance around and don't see anything. "What did you forget?" He says, "I'm going to need that resume back." I only made one copy. I'm stunned. For a second, I think he's making a really bad joke, and I'm looking all over his face for any sign of humor or anything at all in his expression to help me figure out what the heck he's talking about. We stare at each other awkwardly, me with a blank expression and him with an expectant, "Sorry about that," kind of grimace. He finally glances down at his resume, the sheet of paper I set aside on my desk. It slowly dawns on me that this guy actually wants me to give his resume back to him. So I did. Good luck in life, pal. You're going to need it. Story 17. I used to review resumes. Don't put your college GPA. If it's there, I'll look at it, and if it's low, I might put you in the no pile just because I have too many to go through. For co-ops, internships, sure, but after college, just take it off. If you took relevant coursework from undergrad, etc., put the class name, not the course number at your university. I have no idea what Econ 4567 is. I had someone once put progress bars on their resume as a measure of their proficiency. I did enjoy how clever it was, saying that they were 90% fluent in Spanish, 50% in French, but putting 50% at teamwork skills? Don't put that. If you're several years into your postgrad life, and you have a 2-page resume that includes lots of relevant experiences, but also has every job you've ever had, including high school babysitting, you should take that off. If you're applying for a tech job, focus on skills like programming languages tools you know how to use, etc. I assume if you're applying for an engineering position, you can use Microsoft Word. It looks like filler to me, especially if it's one of the only things on there. Tailor your resume for the job you are applying for. If you're looking at documentation, administration, etc., then Word is absolutely a skill you can include. These are things I looked for in the industry I was in. These aren't definitive rules. Story 18. This isn't common nor should be, but I'm going to share it anyway. A guy turned in a resume for a sales job with a picture of his face and a pie chart breaking down his amazing traits like listening and dedication. Story 19. I've seen a few people mention their hobbies and interests on their resume. It's actually not needed. That's something the recruiter will ask in an in-person interview to see how you will fit within the company environment. Story 20. I worked in a college career development office for a few years, and what may not be the biggest mistake, but the most common was improper formatting. Almost half of students that came to us for help seemed like they had never seen a resume before. We had students not even have their name on their own resume. Story 21. As a recruiter, hiring manager, I can say that there is no right or wrong way to do a resume. It all depends upon who is looking at it and what they are looking for. It might be perfect for someone, while someone else might hate it. You just never know. Do what you think is right and don't sweat it. You could be the perfect candidate, but they pick someone's kid instead. Story 22. I redo resumes for people on the side, and I'm on a hiring team at work. I have a list of annoyances. 1. Multi-page resumes with only half a page filled. It looks more incomplete that way than by removing some stuff and keeping it to one page. Basically, just fill however many pages you have. My general rule is 1 page per decade of work experience max. 2. Inconsistent formatting. Assign a font to each type of text. For example, all headers in 12 PT bold font, content in 10-point regular font, job titles 10-point italicized font, etc. 3. Typos. We had a guy who misspelled his hometown that was in a completely different state. We had no idea, but our director was from the area. He didn't get the job for other reasons, but the first question the director asked him was why he didn't know how to spell his hometown. Great start to the interview. And just for good measure, even though it doesn't answer the op, do not use a table to format your resume. Most companies nowadays use applicant tracking software. The ATS can't read your tables, which means your profile won't get the credit it should. Keep everything in lines. No columns, no tables, no shapes. None of that. Story 23. Not a recruiter, but I had a friend back in the day who thought it was cute to put funny stuff on his resume when it was actually kind of cringe-worthy. Like he put under skills, I can do a Batman impression my niece loves. When you're pushing 25, you just sound immature. It's a job interview, not a date. You're not trying to charm this person with cute stories that show you would be a good dad. Dude never got the jobs he wanted to this day. Story 24. I'm not a recruiter. Still, I'd take a look at every resume that comes close to me, just for a chuckle. All that information that's supposed to make me imagine or even idealize your personality. The interviewer is going to check that as soon as you step through the door. Dynamic people person? Good team player, but do you know how to excel? Then ducking, tell me about it. Don't leave a IT skills average you get. Also the 3. 4 pages resumes where there are 20 jobs, but not a single one related to the position you are applying for. Just take the more important ones and give a single sheet. So I need to buy toilet paper instead of using your resume. I was introduced long ago to the Europass model. Is the best example I've seen of clear and to-the-point resumes. Story 25. Did a recent round of recruitment where approximately half of all the applicants asked for feedback, even ones that didn't even make the long list. We don't give feedback unless there's an interview involved, and politely explained that. But one woman wouldn't take no for an answer, sent us a gap analysis of her experience versus the job description, told us we must have made a mistake. Could she pop by for an informal interview and a look around the office to get a feel for the place? Demanding to know if her experience isn't what we're looking for. Then how should she get the right experience? Maybe it was the particular role and the ad placements by we got a lot of needy applicants, but she took the biscuit. I'm all for showing how keen you are and taking a little initiative, but also keen on respecting boundaries. Accepting when no is no and not making the recruitment process more resource-heavy than we need it to be. Above all, know when your persistence is not a positive trait. Story 26. One time, while filling out paperwork for a job I ended up getting, I was super nervous. And for some reason, put my social security number in the wrong format, and the manager asked me why it was like that. I just told her that's how it is, and it never got brought up again. I'm surprised I got the job, since it's very detail-oriented. Story 27. I got 2-1. The guy's resume came in okay, so we got him into the office. He then proceeded to tell me that I should not contact previous employer as he was accused of stealing fish. He then went on for 10 minutes telling me how it unfolded and how innocent he was. Didn't hire him. 2 got a resume with literally no info about him, but mentioned one role, which just his title. The rest of the resume was fill in here. Well, I took a gamble for a laugh. In walks this old geezer for a very difficult warehouse job, and you know what? He had a great personality and talked through his previous job. I did tell him that his resume was crap, but he talked the talk. 4 years later, he did an amazing job, and everyone loved him. The dice really rolled in his favor. Story 28. Please, put your cell phone number on your resume, even if you still live at home, and it says home number. I don't want to call trying to set up an interview and have to talk to your parents. Story 29. No matter how well your resume is written, and no matter what information it does or does not include, some companies will think it's correct, and some companies will think it's wrong. I ran into this years ago. I completely reworked my resume because the chief HR rep at a fairly large company that I knew told me exactly how they wanted it. She worked with me for a couple of hours telling me exactly what to put. I submitted it to several companies, and some companies told me it was fine, and some wanted more information than what she told me I should have on there, and some wanted less. Story 30. Bolding random words in paragraphs. Somewhere, someone said, hey, you should bold out the tech you use to make it stand out. So then I get resumes like this. Worked as a Java programming using Agile to create full stack systems with design patterns utilizing OOP. It's just clutter. If you want to call out a specific set of skills, list them in a skills section. Moreover, unless it's really specific to the job you did, I don't really care what tech you used at the job. Chances are, it won't be the same tech stack we use. Story 31. Tailor your resume to each position you're going for. Work and education background can stay the same, but consider writing a purpose, mission statement to explain key skills and what you're looking for, which should fit the job description. Story 32. Careless mistakes. Everybody has access to a dictionary or a spell checker, and if you're a bad proofreader, get someone else to proofread it. If you submit a sloppy resume, it looks like you don't care about the job. Story 33. I just want to add that if you're putting in a resume, you better make sure that your Facebook and social media is in check as well. An immediate turnoff is when you have unflattering things on your social media. I've seen people not even get an interview because of it. Story 34. Long damn resumes. If your resume is longer than 2 pages, you better have a Nobel Prize or something. When a resume is long, I can guarantee you that the biggest takeaway is this person lacks communication skill. Story 35. If you are in a new grade or in university, take off your childhood sports. In fact, unless you have literally no experience, don't put childhood sporting accomplishments. Story 36. Not a recruiter, but a senior engineer who has read many resumes. One resume listed goals as interfere with customer. Methinks he wanted to say interface with customer. HR recruiters, what is considered a huge red flag on someone's resume? My father-in-law was once involved in a hiring process and saw a resume he threw out very quickly. Not only was it chronological instead of anti-chronological, not a red flag per se, but not very practical either. The first and oldest achievement the applicant put on it was her shoelacing diploma. Yes, the thing we get in kindergarten when you have learned to tie your shoe. According to the applicant, it proved that she was a go-getter. To him, it proved that she lacked common sense. Story 2. We saw a guy apply for a master's degree internship in a scientific lab, saying on the last page of his resume that he had invented the 7th law of magnetism or something like that, followed by a nonsense description of what it was. The rest of the resume was absolutely fine, and we reminded ourselves that it's always crucial to read a resume to the end before making any decision. And piece of advice for anyone who applies somewhere and think they have an unrecognized discovery worth a Nobel Prize. Have it recognized before you put it on your resume. Story 3. As someone who went through the ringers in the architecture field and now part of the hiring process, my advice is to keep resumes to 1 page. We really don't have time to go through 2 pages of awards and merits, and portfolios that are above 10 pages really are not necessary. We have gotten 40-page portfolios that are incomplete and look ugly. I'd rather see 5, 10 good pages and a solid 1-page resume. It automatically signals fluff to us, especially when the portfolio lacks substance. Through my career, I have always done 1-page resume, 2-page portfolios, and letters of recommendation. Then on my resume or in emails, I give a link to my full portfolio and full website about my merits. Also, as of lately, this whole Google architect is real. For example, we have seen a latest trend in work not being original, almost blatant copies. Story 4. Not HR, but recruited many times. Poor grammar and spelling, no relevant experience, inconsistent fonts and layout, too long. A well-worded resume should convey enough in 2 pages to elicit an interview. Story 5. Had to check a few resumes for our vacant position. My biggest problem is lying. 1. Candidate says they have a lot of experience with a certain technology, but when asked, doesn't know anything. 2. Dates of employment or education don't match up. Had a guy claiming he had 4 jobs at the same time. 3. Experience doesn't add up. Don't claim you have 10 years of experience with a framework created 5 years ago. Story 6. A very unprofessional email is definitely one. You see some insane email. I knew someone who got an email address that had Big Daddy in it. For anyone who needs a professional email address, personally, I find any combination of your first, middle, last names, initials, and birth date are all acceptable. In fact, any numbers but 420, 69, etc. And 123 is fine. Story 7. Had a resume submitted last week by a young lady that said, and I quote, "I occasionally show up on time," laughed my arse off and put it in the floor file. Story 8. I used to run training program and we had about 4,000 applicants for 200 positions each year. Bad grammar and spelling automatically got a resume thrown out because the job required so much writing. Also, get the name of the agency correct. Story 9. This is why my company doesn't use HR for hiring. HR doesn't work with the employees. The managers do. HR will weed out perfect applicants over the silliest things and give preference to people for things totally unrelated to the job. Our managers get the resumes and applications, and they choose who to interview. HR then conducts background checks and verification. Their decisions can be overruled by upper management. When our company started using an HR staff to do all the hiring, we ran into a horrible staffing shortage, and what new hires we did get were unworkable. The company's profits dropped, and long, reliable employees quit because of the bureaucracy that an HR office created. The owner fired half the HR staff and limited the remaining HR staff to compliance issues and payroll paperwork. Our managers do all the recruiting and hiring. Employees are happy, and the company is thriving again. Story 10. Not really a red flag, but a resume that's longer than 2 pages. And unless you've got 10 plus years of experience, 1 page is fine. A resume should be a knock on the door. You don't kick the door down with your resume. Story 11. Was recruiting a while back for a couple of positions in my company. Got one CV that was 18 pages long, detailing in minute detail everything this guy had done at previous jobs. Another included a 75-page portfolio. Suffice to say, neither got an interview. One of the guys that got the job brought a short portfolio of a few pages with plenty of pictures to the interview. Far more appropriate. Story 12. Still spelling engineer wrong after getting the degree. Seriously, Google that or listen to the autocorrect. I know math is your thing, not spelling, but still. Story 13. I once had someone hand in a resume with 6 whole pages of job history, each one described with a paragraph of detail about the skills she'd learned and what the role involved. There must have 20 jobs on there, at least. She had also put the dates she started and left each job. The longest was 4 months. Face palm. Story 14. As a positive, had a woman apply for a job. Her CV listed her as a mother for the previous 10 years. She listed her skills and tasks like any other job. Prior to that, she was in the Army, and in her bio, she described herself as a confident, reliable, and hardworking individual with expert weapon handling skills and combat experience. It was pretty cool. Red flag the guy who described himself as a third-place candidate. Story 15. Not HR, but a former hiring manager. I had an applicant submit a 13-page resume. They had written a miniature novel detailing all of their interpersonal conflicts and struggles at each position, so of course I scheduled an on-site. During the interview, they stopped, said, "Hold on, I need to take my meds," opened a couple of pill bottles, and took their mood stabilizers and psych meds before continuing. Toward the end, they expressed a need to work from home 4 days per week due to mental health reasons. There were a couple other odd requests I forget. After a couple days, they called to let me know they took a position elsewhere at a very large, well-known company. Story 16. I left a law enforcement job with no notice due to my supervisor breaking a court order and doing something illegal. I tried to notify his superiors, but nobody cared. Finding a new job in the same field has proven challenging. Other agencies don't seem to care about why I left, only that I left a job after 8.5 years with no notice.